So today I'm going to talk about online teaching and learning with Onshape and Zoom, especially to enable real-time feedback and assessment. So thank you all for joining and for being here today, and I hope you find it useful. So I'm glad to hear I sound good. Thanks everyone for the feedback. So very briefly, I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then I'd like to take a poll or two, if I can make it work, to understand all of you a little bit and your experience so far, if you've had any with Onshape and teaching. Then I'll try to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that I've experienced with remote teaching, and then how we can use preparation and configuration of both Onshape and Zoom to enable real-time feedback. And I'll try to summarize for me the greatest takeaways that we here at PTC and Onshape have found in our experience. So as I said, my name is Peter Zink. I'm the Director of Academic Enablement at PTC and Unshape. I've been at PTC for about a year, and before that I was a faculty member at Boston University, where I taught CAD, automation, and manufacturing for many years. And before that, I've got my PhD in material science and engineering, and I have a bachelor's degree in physics. And I like surfing, so this is a picture of me actually doing something called scurfing, which is a mashup of surfing and water skiing, where you hold a rope behind a boat like you're water skiing, but you ride a surfboard. So fun time if you ever get an opportunity to do that. It's a pretty cool sport. So let me try here while I'm on this slide to launch a poll. If I could, I'd love to know if you're listening right now, if you're an educator, or if you're involved in any kind of education, at what level, and just simply K-12 or university or post-secondary. So if you could please fill out that poll. I've checked the box to show so that you should be able to see the answers, though I'm not quite sure how to see that. Oh, there it's coming in now. Great. So it looks like so far 85 or 80% maybe K-12. So that's great, though. In 80-20 maybe K-12 and universities so far. So that's great. The topics I'm going to cover, I think, apply in both cases, but I was just curious to know. There's a couple small differences, perhaps, in how we'll think about arranging and managing a classroom in both cases. So thank you. That's great. I'm gonna end that one now that we have a sense that it's largely K-12, maybe 83 to 16, it seems. So then my second question would be if you're an educator then, and again, are you expecting to do a lot of remote teaching this year? So and just sort of a yes or no. I think we're all a little bit unsure as to what's coming. That's been my impression, speaking to other educators and listening into some of the higher education summits. But yeah, it looks like about 90% of you are expecting to do quite a bit of remote education, or some, and no one has said no. So that's great. That means we're in the right place, and that's my expectation too. So so maybe there's a mix, and that's great for some of you if you're going to be able to do either some in person, or you won't have to do too much remote teaching. It can be a challenge, and it's hard, right? So I'll end that one there. We've got a lot of great answers. I'd also love to know, if you're teaching remotely, then if you'll be expecting to use Zoom. Our research indicated that Zoom is a very popular platform, so that's why I'm going to largely talk about Zoom today. That's what we've found to be the most familiar to our academic audiences, so that's why we're talking about Zoom specifically. Some of what I'll discuss translates across platforms, so it's relevant for others where they have the same functionality, so don't worry if you don't use Zoom. Some of this might still be relevant, I would hope. But it looks like 65% of the respondees so far, or now just 50, at least expect to use Zoom, and then another almost 30% say multiple platforms. So that's interesting. I would have loved to have been able to put in a box there for what other platforms. If you want to put that in the chat, that might be interesting. We'd love to know what other, I'd love to know what other sharing platforms you might use, or remote teaching platforms. So that's really interesting. Great. About half of you would use Zoom mostly. And so then the last question here, and then I'll continue with the presentation, is how often some of you have used Onshape, or do you know it at all? So I've got several categories here. I think I've actually made it so you can choose more than one. So that might skew our results a little bit, but I would love to know what your familiarity and general use of Onshape is, if you've never heard of it, or if you use it, to some level all the way up to every day. So my talk here isn't necessarily specific to familiar Onshape users, but if I know here from this poll that a lot of you are newer, I might talk about a few more basics before I go into some of the more detailed things. I'm also going to demonstrate some of what I'm discussing today in Onshape. So if you've never used it or you haven't seen it much, don't worry, you'll be able to get a little bit of a preview of what it looks like and how easy it is to use. So it looks like 43% of the respondents, or if I add the first two together, maybe almost 60% have either never heard of it or heard of it but never used it. So that's good to know. I'll be pretty careful to make sure that I discuss the basic pros and cons and value of Onshape. A few of you have used it. It looks like almost 30% have used it occasionally. So, and then only a few of you have used it every day. So great. Thanks everyone for your participation there. That was helpful. So, okay, so I'm going to go into an Onshape overview then. So what is Onshape? And some of you might have noticed there was a talk a couple hours ago by my colleague Mark Celli and Dr. Alison Olachewski about Onshape analytics, which is a little more in depth. If you missed that, or if you'd like to know about the analytics, you can go back and listen to that. But I'll start here, assuming you didn't see that. And so Onshape is professional grade parametric CAD software. It was and a design collaboration platform. It's really the Google Docs of CAD is the way to think about it. So Onshape was built to combine the power of traditional CAD modeling with the advantages of modern computing, such as the same kind of modern advantages we see in other SaaS or cloud products like Google Docs, Slack, GitHub, or Office 365. And what this means is that it's really the only cloud platform that runs on any modern browser. So on a PC or a Mac or a Chromebook. And you don't have to download or install anything. It just runs in the browser. It also works on iOS and Android devices. And what's really cool is you can use it on all of these devices simultaneously and anywhere. So you can use it on the train, on a cellular hotspot, whatever you like. Onshape has the incredible function feature that it immediately saves all your work, just like Google Docs does. So as soon as you make any change, it's automatically saved, so you can't ever lose anything. And if you've used GitHub, if you're familiar with that, it has the ability to do versioning and branching and then merging of CAD models, so that we could start with one model, make two different versions, two different people could work on it differently, and then decide which features that the two different people have made they'd like to bring back together to create a single combined model. Because it instantly saves, nothing's ever lost, and all that data is in the cloud. And there's more than 100,000 users every month using Onshape. There are two different educational versions of Onshape. There's the Education Standard. If any of you are using Onshape Education today, this is most likely the version you're using, and this is the version I'm going to demonstrate today. This is free, and it's always been free and will continue to be free, and really intended for single users or teachers with classrooms with a relatively small, maybe less than 50 students. That's not a hard line, but maybe just an approximate amount at which it works well for. And we've seen a huge growth in the Education Standard free Onshape use this spring as a result, in large, we assume because of COVID. And that's what we've heard from the users as well, that it's a great solution for their remote teaching needs. We've also just released an enterprise version of the Education Edition that I'll talk about a little bit here, which doesn't have any more features than the Education Standard from a CAD modeling perspective, but it has some features related to the large needs of large institutions. So this is, if you sign up between now and November 20th, we've also decided to make this enterprise version of Onshape free for a year. So both versions are at the moment free for institutions to use, and the enterprise version, if you sign up between now and November 20th, is free as well. So that should be, we hope that'll be very helpful. And this is directly in response to the needs and burdens placed upon institutions as a result of COVID. So we hope that will help the CAD community and the academic community during this challenging time. So there are many reasons that Onshape really makes this kind of remote learning easier. And the biggest one is at the top here for me, from my perspective, that it enables student to student as well as student to teacher collaboration. So again, it's, if you haven't used it and you're not familiar with it, you can just think it works like Google Docs does. And it allows us to, in real time, you sort of observe or design together, or to both teach and assess our students' learning. On the left side here, the three items that have a little orange asterisk are features that are in the enterprise. So the enterprise education edition of Onshape additionally and contains data analytics, which if you want to understand more about, you can go watch the talk from 2 p.m. with Mark Celli. But it really allows us to gain a really deep insight into our students' usage and design activity. There's an incredible wealth of data that gets saved because everything the student does is recorded online in the cloud and saved. There's also, it enables global permissions management, so we can, at a sort of very centralized way, we can manage teams and permissions for individuals, or access and permissions for individuals and teams. And it also enables SSO integration, which really is helpful for helping your students log in to Onshape more seamlessly, especially with K-12, where there are all kinds of, we understand, challenging policies around privacy. And there is a link, perhaps we can put in the chat. I think it's onshape.com/privacy. That will take you to the Onshape privacy policy, where you can look at the details of that if you'd like to know it. The features on the right, the class management, content management, and action items, those are functional in both the education enterprise as well as the standard free education version. That is, we can, anyone, even your students, can invite other students and make teams out of them, out of groups of students. You can organize your content into folders and use that to share content with individuals or teams. And you can use some of the features like comments to easily follow up on grading and provide feedback to your students. And you can give them a mechanism as well to reach out to you within the product and ask for help on specific parts or features. And I'll demonstrate that as well. In the chat, someone has asked a couple of questions, and Mark, thank you very much for putting in some of the links. So for those of you who have questions, my team will be helping to answer them as we go. And, you know, I just want to remind you that the reason Onshape has all those features is because it was designed with them. And, you know, Onshape was really designed to enable learning, and that's been fundamental to it from the beginning. So this is John Herstick, the founder, just underscoring that for us. And, you know, we've also heard some great feedback from some of the users. So here's a teacher who has found that, you know, as a result of the needs to do online teaching right now, he's switching to Onshape so that to help enable him. And he's found it to be really useful. And we hear quotes like this all the time. So if you haven't tried Onshape before, if you're interested at all, you can go sign up. It's cad.onshape.com/education. And we can maybe put that as well in the chat. And it's really easy to sign in and get started. And of course, if there's all kinds of help and learning material in there to get you started. Okay, so that was sort of an overview of Onshape and its features. Now I'm going to dive a little deeper into what we're the session topic here, which is if we're talking about teaching CAD remotely and what we need to do. And there's sort of two things, I think. One is that we have to think a little bit differently about the way teaching CAD is done. I taught CAD for many years in the classroom, and now that we're teaching it online, it's certainly a bit of a different ball game. And the way we've found most effective to do that is to really leverage the strengths of multiple technologies, of both Onshape and Zoom, and we found Zoom to be the best. So I'm going to talk about how we use Zoom and Onshape together, and where we've leveraged the strengths of each of those to try to get our students to learn the most. So in general, some of the challenges of CAD education that anyone here who's taught probably can understand and realize is that, especially with CAD, right, that historically you need expensive PCs and computer labs, and that sometimes the IT infrastructure can be a limitation. There's a trend, at least in universities, to move towards a bring your own device model, where instead of the university of supplying computers, the students bring their own. And that can mean that students show up with different kinds of computers, which is hard for some CAD platforms that only work on, say, Windows. And every semester we're starting with a new set of students in a limited amount of time to try to bring them up to some level of capability. Of course, now remote teaching is making some of this even harder, right? Where definitely the students are using their own devices and they're off campus, and we still want them using the best technology, right? The technology of the future to learn, so that they're going to be ready to go out into industry when they graduate, either from high school or college. So more specifically, there's some challenges that I'm really going to try to drill into and address here. And one is that we probably recognize, if you've taught CAD, that CAD isn't so hard to learn at a basic level, right? Most of us could probably, and if you've never tried, you probably can get into Onshape and make some simple models, and that's not so hard. But it takes a long time and a lot of practice to really become a master at a CAD software, and to be able to take advantage of all of the different capabilities of that software. And what my experience has been is that the time required really for that practice, and to be able to complete assignments even on a weekly sort of class basis, is rarely possible to do in an in-class time, right? Then we often end up setting up lab times, maybe where there can be a TA involved to help give the students more practice time with someone around to help them get through the sticky parts. And of course, the fundamental nature of CAD and CAD software is that there's no one right way to model a particular object. We want to be able to model it in a way that reflects our design intent, that reflects the nature of that engineered object and how we expect it might change and be reconfigured as a product matures. So because the software is designed to enable that freedom and that flexibility, unfortunately, that also means that there's a lot of paths the student can take, and a lot of ways for them to get stuck potentially and need help. So so because of that, and I think I've always found, because of that, it's really useful to be able to work, as this person is here in the image, right next to students, so that when they hit a little sticky spot, they can just raise their hand and say, what's wrong here? And you can give them just that little bit of push in the right direction, or ask them the question they need to hear to help them get unstuck. And that's even harder to do with remote teaching, where you're not there with them and you can't necessarily see what they're really struggling with. But I think we'll see that Onshape, and especially paired with Zoom, really makes it possible to still sort of do some of that feedback. So part of what we'll talk about is how to use Onshape in a certain way, and the other half is really about Zoom, because what I've learned is that really it's Zoom that can be, in some cases, the harder thing to learn. So we found that in our training sessions, it's really effective to help students get to know Zoom, and to do that, we even cut out some time and spend time getting them familiar with the features of Zoom. So specifically, to start, to make sure that they have the ability to turn on their audio and video. Audio, of course, so they can talk and ask questions, and video, so you can see what they're doing. And if they're not on video, who knows what they're doing? They may be in the car or whatever else. So, and then of course, it's really useful if they can use chat. That way they can ask questions like you're doing right now, without necessarily interrupting. And especially, we almost always have more than one instructor in our Zoom classes, Unshape classes, and that's useful too, so one instructor can be focused on responding to chat. Of course, it's very useful for them to share their, to share their screen. Uh, this can be really one of the harder things because for many reasons I'll get into, but it's a really critical and useful feature of Zoom. Um, and for them to, of course, ask for help and also to join breakout rooms. And I'll talk a little bit more about breakout rooms in a while. But this is a way for us to break the students from one large group, depending on the size of your class, down to smaller groups where you can potentially work more closely with a smaller group of individuals who might be a little more comfortable in a smaller setting. And that gets to some of the other student logistics. So one of the questions that's come up, and you probably as teachers are all familiar with these things, and if you've done any remote teaching, that it's a little different if students are alone or in the same room. And perhaps with COVID, it's a given that they'll generally be alone. But if they're together for any reason, sound can be a challenge, especially if multiple Zoom windows are open. There's an echo problem that can occur. So we found it best in that case if students have headphones with a mic. And of course, at that point, many students have, if they're gamers, they might have a gaming headset. Those really work well. And of course, there's fewer distractions if a student is alone. But then, of course, they're reliant on you for help. So that's really important too. Perhaps more important and less obvious are the management of the screen. And so here you can see in this little laptop image I've created that there's an image of me on the left. Here I am in Zoom, and the image on the right of an Onshape window. And many students don't have multiple monitors, so they're forced to look at side-by-side images like this, which can make screen real estate a challenge. And so then it's helpful to actually be able to manage the browser using Zoom, the same word here, but zoom in and out in the browser, and I'll demonstrate this as well in Chrome here in a moment in Onshape. But it can take some time to help a student manage this and get their two screens side by side if they only have a single desktop. Sometimes students do solve this problem a different way, and they'll join Zoom on their phone or on an iPad or something while they're using Onshape and CAD on their laptop. And then that works too, and it's fine until you ask them to share their screen. Of course, at that point, Zoom is on a different device. And if it's another laptop, an easy or a way to solve that, or either way is a good way to solve that, is to ask them to open two versions of Onshape on both devices. Onshape is completely happy working that way. You can have Onshape. Nope, I've heard someone is asking me to turn up my mic. I can probably move it a little. I hope that's better. Thanks, David. It works very well to have multiple Onshape windows open. So you can have one open for the purpose of screen sharing to use occasionally when the student needs help, and another one open for when they're just working and they don't want to have the conflict of Zoom and the split screen. Okay. So there's some things I'm going to go through to talk about preparing Onshape. Broadly, really preparing Onshape as well as preparing Zoom is a great way to make your remote teaching go more smoothly. And there's several options here. I'll try to offer a couple different ways of doing each thing and let you choose your favorite, but I'll also indicate what's worked best for us. There's really two Onshape conceptual entities that are useful to understand. One is a team, which is any group of students, and a folder, which is a group of content or a collection of content. And by using those together, you can do many things to make teaching easier. We'll also talk a little bit about setting up the content so that there's sort of one per student. And there's a couple ways to do this, either as one part studio per student, which for those of you who haven't seen Onshape, I'll demonstrate in a moment, or we can use multiple documents. So there's a couple different options. Of course, before you do any of that, we want to make sure your students are in Onshape, so you want to invite them to it. I've put that link here. I think it might go in the chat also, but it's very easy to send your students this link and ask them to log in, and they can create a free EDU account that way. It's a little different if you have Enterprise. If you go through and you sign up for Enterprise, there's an onboarding process where you'll learn how to do that. So I'm not going to go through it here, but for the free version, this is all you need to do, is to send this link to your student and ask them to sign up. So then to create teams, teams again are groups of students. So that's what I've tried to highlight here is that there's you can have many groups. So the purple guy here in the center is the instructor, and we've got 2 groups of students. So really what we want, the purpose of making a team is to more easily be able to share content to that team. Teams of students can contain, different teams can contain the same students. So you could have any given student could be on any number of teams. And students can also create teams as well. So it's not just instructors that can do this. It's pretty easy to do, and I'll demonstrate this in a moment. Actually, I think I'll do that right now. So let me go to Onshape. Here's an Onshape window. I'm going to make it a little bigger for the moment. I'm signed in here as an instructor, so you can see this little instructor in the top right-hand corner. I've just created this Onshape account for the purpose of this demo. And there's a few things I want to show you. One is that I can use the Chrome zoom function to change the size of this really easily of Onshape. And what happens is, and there's also, of course, a keyboard shortcut for this, which I'll use here. Some students end up, as I mentioned, with, especially if we want to do side-by-side windows on a computer, with so much stuff here that it's really hard to see. And this is where using the zoom function to shrink the text size is really valuable, because we get that we can make the Onshape desktop look more functional and useful that way. So that zoom function is really helpful to change that size. Then once you're in Onshape, oh, thanks, Alyssa, for letting me know about the camera. I'll turn that off. Once we're in Onshape, we can go to our account, and you'll find Teams. So this is where, in the free education, standard education version, we can go to Teams, and here's where we can create a team, and all you have to do is type in a name and push create. You can put a description if you want, and then you can add members. I've made a team earlier here. I called it Sample CAD Class Student Team, and I've added a couple of my colleagues, including, notice I've added a student named Student 1. And this student, I'll log in as this person in a minute, and we'll see what that can do. So both myself and the student are members of this team. And if I wanted, I could make this student an admin. So that might be useful if perhaps I would do that for my other team member here, if, say, she was a TA or another technical person at my school who I wanted to be able to help me manage this team. Okay, so and then another thing then we can do with this team once we have it is create and use folders to organize content. So I'm going to go back to Onshape here to my documents. So over here on the right, I have the student who I added to the team, and here's the faculty person or the instructor on the left. And so here when we're looking at the Onshape interface, for those of you who've never seen it before, this is what your Onshape sort of home screen looks like. It shows you the documents you've opened recently, shows you any folders that you may have created, and any documents that you have that aren't in folders. It also, you can click on recently opened documents, things you've created or have been shared with you, the teams you're on. So I can see that I'm on that test team I just created and the sample class student team. And if I click on that, it will filter and show me just the documents that are shared with that team. You can also look at public documents and look at anything that's been shared publicly and created on Onshape around the world. There's a lot more here, and I could go into some length, but I think at the moment I'm going to keep going, and we can always come back though and talk more about Onshape if anyone is looking for a more basic intro. So here I've created a folder called Example CAD Class Documents, and at the moment, if I right-click it, I can see by clicking Share that I haven't shared it with anyone. But I could share this with the student 1 who's over here. And I'll give them view privileges to that folder. When I click share, I can then see that's what I've done. Could always change those settings if I wanted. And now as soon as I do that, the student, if I refresh their screen, now they can see that document. So they can see that folder. So now they can, not only can they see the folder, but they'll see everything in that. So I've set up that that folder with a copy of 3 documents, 1 for each of the students in my class. Just 3 for now, but you could make as many as you like. And I've further, over here, the instructor, you can see that I've shared this first one. I've given edit privileges to the student. So I also came in and typed in their name and gave them that. For the other ones, I've shared them with other students. So each document here has been shared with a different person or not shared at all. And so what that means is the student, when they open up the one that I've given them edit privileges to, when they open that up, they get all of the Onshape functionality, the CAD functions we would expect. So they can modify this and change it and do whatever they like. If they try to open up one of the other student documents, you can see it says this is view only. So in this case, they can see their colleagues' work, the other students' work, but they can't edit it. If I didn't want them to even see what the other students were doing, all I'd have to do is go in and just remove that share from them, that share privileges. Now, when they go to Onshape, they only see the one document where I gave them edit privileges to. They don't see all of them. So by sharing a combination of folders, maybe as view only or not, and or documents individually with edit privileges, even though as an instructor, I can see all of my students' documents in one place, my students have a nice uncluttered desktop where they only see if I want, only the things they can edit, or perhaps I can let them view the other students as well. So that's just some of the that's our favorite way of organizing this, but you can see you'd have many different options. And back to the slides, I've tried to summarize some of those different options in this table. So we can share either documents, either just a copy with each student or a whole folder, and whether or not we make it view only or editable, the students will be able to do different things as a result. And there's different advantages and challenges to these. And I'm not going to go through all of this right now. I think especially for many of you who have not used Onshape, it's probably a little granular, but you can always come back and refer to this later if you like. What I will talk about a little bit is our experience has been that it's really useful for the students to edit, to have their own copy of a model, excuse me, a part studio or a model or a document to work on. And so there's a couple different ways we can set that up. And I'll go through those right now. So let me go back to my instructor view. And so in this case, as I mentioned, here I've created a student document for each student. So a document in Onshape is a little bit different from how you might think of CAD files traditionally. So traditionally in CAD, we have files, right? And we would have a file that's a part or a model. We have a file that's a drawing and a file that's an assembly, and they're all sort of separate entities. In Onshape, a document like this molecule document can have many things in it. It can have tutorials, videos, images, what they call part studios. And we call them part studios and not parts because a part studio can actually contain multiple parts. It can have more than one thing in it. So it doesn't just have to be a single part, and it can have an assembly. So this collection of items is really what we call a document. And that's really the level at which we might want to share one for each student. This is really useful if you expect the students to really be making a lot of changes, and especially with assemblies where they're putting things together. It's a bit of a cleaner way to have each student have their own space to work without overlapping or accidentally colliding with each other. It's also possible, and I've set up a little example here, somewhere, if you want, you could have one document where here we've set up a number of tutorials and example part studios and assemblies for students to make a coffee grinder. And when we want the students to work here, we invite them all into this document with edit privileges. And what we do for each one, we duplicate this part studio and then rename it so that we have one part studio for each student in our class. So we might end up with 20 of these part studios. Someone just asked if Unshape is fully functional on iPads. By the way, it is. It's that some of the UI is different, but it works really well. So this is a nice way to do this. You can also set up these multiple part studios this way. That's what I'm showing here on the left. The upside of that is that you can work in a single part studio, and if there's a student in that part studio as well, you'll see their name, and all your students are in a single document. The downside may be that there's nothing preventing student 2 from editing student 1's work, so they have to be careful not to do that. On the other hand, they can collaborate and help each other. So it's a trade-off there, and that's just something that you'll have to judge based on your students and how well you think you can assign them. So we've often created a separate document called student studio assignments that says, Jimmy is student 1 and Mary is student 2, etc. Okay. So then we'll go back to Zoom for a moment. So I think I've kind of covered how to set up Zoom and how to prepare students for it a little bit, and also how to set up and prepare Onshape and your Onshape content. Then there's the actual class management, and there's a number of things that we've been finding are really helpful to do from the get-go with Zoom. And one is mute all. It's a really powerful and useful tool. We usually try to start our Zoom sessions a few minutes before the actual class time, and this is a great time to get everyone familiar and comfortable, of course. And then, of course, when class starts, it's a really nice thing to be able to do to mute everyone and make sure that you can kick off your class. It's also useful there, by the way, if you have other instructors in Zoom, you can nominate them as co-hosts so they can help with that. This is another great time at the beginning of class to rename users. I didn't want to try to actually demonstrate Zoom within a different call, so I'm not going to show that, but it's really pretty easy, both as a host or a participant in Zoom, to change your name. A lot of students come in with just their initials and other things, and it can be really tricky to figure out who's who. And of course, just like teaching in person, where it's really helpful to know every student's name, it's really useful to be able to do that in Zoom also. Then the next thing we've done is the way we've organized our classes is that we've started with a little intro and then a pretty fast demo to sort of show a student, here's what we're going to do today. Don't try to follow along, but just look at this cool thing. Here's how you create a multi-part studio, perhaps, and design a coffee grinder. And then we'll go into Zoom breakout rooms where instead of having a group of 30 or 50 students, we break them out into groups of about 10 or less with one instructor per group. And then that instructor can manage and then go through that same process, that same modeling process, or whatever it might be, a little more slowly and carefully with each student in that breakout room. So you can set up the breakout rooms. I've put a screenshot up here of how that works. I've always done it manually, and always set up an extra room, one more than you think you need. You can't, once you create them, add more. So it's useful to have an extra even if you're not going to use it. So if we have three instructors, I set up 4 rooms, and we would also generally have a 4th person involved who's not an instructor, who's just managing the rooms. It's really useful because there's some things that don't work as in quite the way you might expect. So when we're all together in the main session, anyone can chat with anyone else. Once we go into breakout rooms, you can only chat with people who are in your breakout room with you. So it's also important then for the instructors to have some kind of chat mechanism that's external to Zoom. So whether it's Slack or iMessage or SMS or whatever, it's really important to be able to make sure that you can chat with the other instructors to make sure you're coordinated on timing, or if a student's having a problem, someone can help them. And that's another thing we've done, so that extra person who's not necessarily a dedicated room instructor often functions as a emergency helper. So if one person in a room is really struggling, perhaps they can't even get Onshape open for some reason, the room manager will remove them from the breakout room and bring them into that extra room and work with them one-on-one to solve their problem, get them up to speed, and then return them to their original room. You can set up the rooms ahead of time. It only works if you know your student emails, but you may know them. And that can be useful. We've found it just as helpful to do it during the start of the meetings and trainings while we're doing a more broad demo. It doesn't take very long, and that's an easy way to do it. Anyway, so it's not hard to use, but it's worth practicing a little bit. It's a really powerful way to break your students up into smaller groups so you can give them a little bit more advanced attention. If you have a TA, if you're a university instructor, or if you have some other teacher, co-teacher, or maybe even an advanced student in K-12 who can help you, I think it's worth really trying this out. We found it to be a powerful tool. Another thing that we found to be really useful in Zoom to make it possible to help students, and this is usually what happens inside a breakout room. So even just yesterday, I was teaching Onshape to a group of teachers who are then going to go teach it to others. And they were all struggling a little bit to learn Onshape and to learn some of the modeling features to get used to the UI when they'd never seen it before in many cases. For example, here I was trying to get this student to use the little gray X on the top right to close out this tab. So with the annotate functionality in Zoom, you can draw like I did with this little circle. You can actually create text and even give them instructions. One of my favorite things is actually the arrow button here that's highlighted in blue, because when you use the arrow button, you don't have to erase it. To get rid of this circular stuff or the text, I'd have to click the clear trash can button here, and that gives me an option to then clear off the screen, which is good because then otherwise it can get a little cluttered for the student. But when you click the arrow key, every time you click it goes somewhere else. So especially when I'm asking a student to follow, if they're a little confused and they've lost track of what order to do some things in, the little orange arrow is a nice way to in a somewhat uncluttered way, guide them through a set of tasks in Onshape over Zoom. So that would be my recommendation. But anyway, if you haven't played with annotations, that's another fun thing to do. Turn on a Zoom with some colleagues and try that. So that brings us to some real-time feedback, and I'll go into Onshape here in a moment and demonstrate some of these things. But there's really sort of 3 tiers of feedback that we found most possible and helpful when teaching Onshape remotely. One is just through Onshape. We don't really need Zoom for this. We can directly observe students' work by opening up their documents, and we can look at their history, which I'll show you, or even just look at their feature trees and open up their sketches and models and see what they might have done. We can also use the comment feature, which I'll show, to communicate with students directly or to allow them to communicate with us. And we can ping them with the @ and then their username, or we can tag even features of models and they can as well, to ask questions about specific parts or features on their parts. And then lastly, we can work together. There's a fuzzy line between follow mode, which is an Onshape feature, and Zoom sharing, where actually watching what a student is doing in real time is a great way, of course, to give them feedback and see what they might be struggling with. Follow mode is a feature of Onshape where if 2 people are logged in and looking at the same document at the same time, either one of them can click on the other one's icon and follow and watch what they're doing. Unfortunately, it doesn't include everything the person does, and that's where sometimes we have to flip over to screen sharing in Zoom to really help someone out. So let me demonstrate those things momentarily. So here's my student window and my teacher window once again. And so I'm going to go into this wheat grinder that I've shared with this student. So here's this wheat grinder exercise. And so now both the student and I are looking at the same part. So here, and we can see that because the student can see the teacher, my teacher instructor icon up there. Meanwhile, the instructor can see the student's icon or up there. So we can see each other and each other's presence. So one of the things I could do is perhaps this student, the idea they might say, I might ask them to duplicate this part studio. So now they have their own, and even rename it to student, 1 wheat grinder. And then within that, we might ask them to start maybe modeling, and maybe we'd give them directions in some way. So if we might ask them to extrude this part and so forth. And I'll just do one quick extrusion. As soon as they're done with that, if I look into that studio they've created, I can see what they've done. So I might further ask them to maybe cut out a little hole from that. And you can see as soon as the student finishes, I'm able to see the results of their work. Now, maybe they've made a mistake farther back in one of their sketches. Perhaps the base is too big. And I could log into their sketch without even telling them and update their models for them and just fix that. Or I could tell them I'm going to do that because it'll help you not struggle as you go forward. Of course, I don't see exactly what the student is doing if I'm just in the same model. If I double click on that student's icon though, now if they move their model around, I can see exactly what they're doing in real time. So maybe they're zooming in and they're looking at that feature, and we can talk about that together. So it can be a great way for us to experience and have a conversation. And maybe then I want them to extrude a new part here and add a whole new solid to their model. Oops, I've messed that up. So a new one. And so I can watch them do that in real time while they're modeling. I can't see if they if they open a right click, a context menu, that won't show up. I can see where their mouse is, but not exactly what they're looking at. I also won't be able to see if they edit a sketch. All I can see is that they are editing it. This little purple box lets me know they're in that, but it won't let me see exactly what they're doing within. So that can be that's another limitation. So those are places where we have to jump over and use Zoom sharing to really help a student at that point. But it's nice to be able to do some of this without going into Zoom sharing, especially because some students struggle sharing their screen and just because it's quick. Also, of course, if they start, perhaps when they're extruding, you can see that what I see is only that they're creating a new feature. I can't see exactly what they're doing when they do it, but it's still useful enough that I know they're working on a new feature. And if they're struggling, I can say, okay, well, click the green check or the red X to finish that feature. So then I can at least go in and see what they've done, and maybe that's where I'll fix it to be correct and to help them out. So that's where it's really useful. If I suppose there's a fuzzy line, and it's something there between when you want to go from Onshape to Zoom, and it really depends on the student in some cases and the specific activity they're up to. I'll show also that if they were to create an assembly, maybe they want to create a wheat grinder assembly here, and I can follow them again while they're doing this. Actually, I want to show this. I'm going to go back to the studio. If I follow that student, so now the instructor is following the student. When the student goes to the assembly, the instructor follows them there. And then as they insert their parts, here they have a collection of parts, or 3 parts. That's why we call it a part studio and not just a part, because actually multiples were made. I can see as they maybe decide to fix the base of their grinder, that becomes fixed. And perhaps they're going to group the top 2 pieces together. And I can see that they've done that. As soon as they create the group, the instructor can see that that's happened. And now, so they can move this part around as this grouped set. And perhaps they want to create a revolute mate between the grinder and the base. So now they've got the ability to rotate that or even animate it. The instructor can't see the animation. They can see some of what's happening, but not everything, right? So again, it's still very useful to be able to follow your students. Though depending on what point they get lost, sometimes you have to go back over to Zoom. Anyway, at this point, I think, let me go back to the presentation. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Comments. Yeah, one more thing. So, and the one other thing that we might do is the student might be confused, so they can open up this comments window. And I've got a couple here from earlier I'll delete for clarity, where they might say, hey, instructor, I know I can't, is this right? And I might not know what they're talking about. So what they can do is tag, maybe they want to tag that little handle. And now the edge of part 3 gets highlighted, and they can add this. As soon as they do that, I'd get a notification over here, and I can say, it looks great. As soon as I do that, they get a note, a reply, and we can have this great little conversation in near real time. So that's really useful, right? So a great way to work together with your students. And I can see that the comment here was tagged to that part. So as an instructor, I can see exactly what they're talking about. That, oh, this is the part in question. It shows me right where that is. So a really powerful tool, and we use that quite a bit with our students to help them in understand what the problems they might be having are. All right, let's go back here. So a couple key takeaways from this presentation are that there are some incredible real-time collaboration tools in Onshape that are really critical aids for online remote teaching and learning, and that it's really important to, I think, as well as teaching CAD, to also teach your students how to leverage and use those tools. It's not just CAD anymore, right? The collaboration is a big part of the design process, and I think having a successful learning experience. And secondly, as for teachers, especially, as you know, I'm sure everyone here who's a teacher understands that preparation is a big part of teaching, and that hasn't gone away here. That preparation configuration of both Onshape and Zoom can be challenging and take some time, but really makes a big difference in class. When you're teaching, it can really take some of the challenge out of making the day go smoothly. So lastly, I just want to reiterate to everyone that the Education Enterprise version, which just came out, is now being offered free. You have to sign up by November 20th if your school can take advantage of this, but it will be free to help support remote learning for the next year as a result of COVID. So I hope that'll be useful to many of you, and I hope you've enjoyed this talk. So happy to take any more questions in the chat in the time we have left. And thank you so much for your attention. So let me look through the chat. Someone has asked, so can we do that without being live on Zoom or other video link? Absolutely. The Onshape collaboration, so the follow mode or the direct observation of student work or the comments, those all work perfectly well without having Zoom involved. Zoom is just useful, and oftentimes a big part of the equation, which is why we're sort of talking about both today. Someone else has asked, do we need Enterprise if we just teach 2 or 3 classes at our school? And nope, you don't. You can teach theoretically as many classes as you like without the Enterprise version. What the Enterprise will get you, the main advantages that I think would be, are often most helpful are SSO, where that's useful, single sign-on. And once you start getting up to hundreds and hundreds of students, perhaps where there's a large turnover and the onboarding or deprovisioning of those students is a kind of a lot of work, there are some Enterprise tools that make that easier. So the Enterprise Onshape is just an addition. So there are 2 education versions of Onshape, which are identical from a CAD management perspective, the Onshape Standard and Onshape Enterprise. There's a question here, can the student secure their Part Studio by creating a password? No, but a student, if I'm a student and I want to create a Part Studio that I don't share with anyone, I simply just don't share it. So if they don't share it with anyone, then no one else can see it and they'll belong to them. So you don't even need a password. So every student will have their own username and password, an email address, login, and password. And by logging in that way, it gives them their own space. Does the Enterprise version remove watermarks? That's a great question. So as you probably could see, where I showed the student view here, these documents, I don't believe, that's a great question. I'm not going to guess on that one. We do see a little watermark out here on this that indicates that this document was created by an education subscriber. But I'll have to hope that one of my colleagues can answer that one. So as to exactly how far those watermarks go and what the repercussions of them are. Looking at other questions. Oh, there's a question about comments. The comment sample I showed, would the comment need to be configured to allow me to see comments from multiple students? What happens, it depends on how you have the documents organized. So here where, if I go to the document that I had set up, where I might have several students working in the same document, then I would see comments from all the students in that document in one place. If I've set up my class such that I have a different document for each student, then I would have to go into each student's documents to see that student's comments. So comments are specific to a document. I believe I can also, in the enterprise version, the instructor would have an activity screen where they could also see notifications more broadly. But in the free EDU version, which is what I'm demonstrating here, it says enterprise, but don't believe that. The free EDU version, there's sort of a one-to-one relationship between documents and comments. Thank you. Mark has clarified the watermark is on both Education Enterprise and Education Standard. Any other questions? I have them scrolling back into them. Someone has asked that they missed the beginning. Are all these features part of Onshape or something that has to be added? And everything I've shown here today, I've talked about Enterprise a little bit, but the demonstrations were all in the free EDU version, the Education Standard version. Okay, I think we're just about out of time. I don't see any other. Oh, here's a question. Do Onshape files export to other CAD packages? And they do, and I can demonstrate that. I could go into my Onshape here, one of my part studios, perhaps, and take one of these parts. Perhaps I want to take this one and export it. And at that point, I get an export dialog box where I can choose any one of these formats. So we're always working on adding more. But at the moment, these are the formats that you'd be able to export to. Andrew has asked, what's the difference between the instructor and student accounts? In this case, nothing. Both of these are free EDU accounts. So I've just named this one instructor demo. So just for the purposes of this, I've given myself a name of instructor demo just to try to make it clear for you. But both of these entities are equal in this case. So the student here also could go into their account and create a team. And they could create a team and even invite their teacher to it. So students have the same ability in the free version that the instructor does. That could change in enterprise, and an enterprise organization could give an instructor greater permissions. And that's one of the kinds of things that you can do with enterprise that you can't do with standard. If a student forgets the username and password, can we reset that for them? In the enterprise, an administrator with the correct permissions would be able to do that for a student, I believe, but not in the free EDU version. A student would have to go to a forgot. When you try to log in, it's just like any other website. If you forgot your password, you would get an email and you could get a reset link. There was a question will Onshape help students with the Fusion 360 certification exam? I'm not sure about that, but Onshape is working on their own certifications, so that may be more valuable for the students to leverage Onshape for Onshape certification. So that we can look more into that, or perhaps someone can put a link in about that when the time comes. I don't believe it's quite ready yet, but it's coming. Okay, I think I've only have 30 seconds left, and I don't see any more questions. So thank you all again for your attention and great questions, and I hope it was helpful. So take care and have a great afternoon.